this day, when we talk about race, people get squeamish. There are some who don't understand why we have a Black History Month in February or scowl at the idea of it. So we want to talk about it and about the realities of racism in Canada right now in 2020. So joining me in this discussion, please welcome Kathleen Bremang-Newman and Jane Schmidt. Kathleen, writer, producer, and, you know, all-around amazing gal. Shem, you are a producer. You are also an on-air talent. Jane, I found at Ryerson University. She is a librarian there, and it will make sense as to why Jane is here when we get into the discussion right now. So let's start with the good old-fashioned trolls, shall we? Shall we?
So we have to.
Let's start with the trolls. Shem, you got a really well-written, grammatically correct post from a troll. Let's put it up. It's awful. This is what it says. Let me explain something to you, you dark, stupid, blank, blank. I hope you go fist yourself into a seizure and paralyze yourself. Hate your kind.
Yeah.
So, okay, so many things I can say, and I even thought, do we even want to go there with a troll? Because we know trolls are trolls and they're sort of looking for attention. Mm-hmm. But the reason why I thought it was important for us to talk about is that this is happening.
Yeah, it's a very regular thing, which is kind of sad to say.
Yeah.
That's not the first time I've received something like that in my years just in media. And when I got it, I was, this is going to sound even worse. I wasn't surprised, like at all. I wasn't surprised at all. It was sort of like, yeah, I get it. I mean, and then I started to think that sounds really painful, and then it was just a really sad state. And I think I was more upset that I wasn't more upset. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. It also makes sense that you weren't surprised, though, and I think that what's interesting about this conversation and why it's important that we have it here is that we seem to be very insular about the incidents that happen to us, because I don't think we see the point in talking about this stuff in mixed company because it never goes anywhere. And that's sort of the reason why we wanted to bring it up today and keep reminding every once in a while. I'll do a clap back on Instagram and remind people, by the way, folks are still racist, and a lot of them through microaggressions.
And a lot of the times that's worse.
Yeah.
I've found when you look at Twitter and you look at social media, Black women get abuse like that the most.
Yeah.
There's stats that prove that. And, personally, I've experienced it all the time. And it is that overt stuff that Canadians love to think. White Canadians, truthfully, love to think doesn't happen here, but it does. And then it's the smaller, the microaggressions, like you mentioned, that, last night I was at a play and a white man touched my hair and said, I love your hair. He gave me a compliment, but then his hands were all in it. And you feel like a pet. If you're a Black woman, you've experienced that. You know that that's just another thing that others you.
That's
and that makes you feel different in that moment. And it's hard. And you're trying to go about your everyday life. It happens in the workplace. A lot of us are working in predominantly white workplaces. And think about all the stresses of your jobs, all the things that you have to do, and then on top of that, you're constantly being reminded of systemic racism.
Constantly.
Constantly.
And being reminded all the time that you're different, you're different, you're different. So that, and it's a tough thing to always have to carry around with you. You were watching the Oscars, as so many of us did, Kathleen, and you had something to say about the Janelle Monáe performance. So break us down what happened that you were not happy with.
Well, I watch the Oscars. I'm an entertainment writer for Refinery 29, and that is my job. And I, as a Black woman who also just loves pop culture, I was really excited in 2019 because there were so many movies like Dolomite Is My Name, Queen and Slim, Us, that were starring Black casts, were created by Black people that I loved and thought they were going to make it to award season. And then they didn't. But then the Oscars opens with Janelle Monáe singing this song, and her backup dancers are dressed as characters from Dolomite Is My Name, from Us, from Queen and Slim.
Right.
And they follow that up with Chris Rock making jokes about how white the Oscars are. They only nominated one Black person in an acting category. That was Cynthia Erivo for Harriet, where she played a slave. And it just, to me, was infuriating. It was like, the message was Black performers are good enough to sing and dance for the Oscars, but they're not good enough to award. And I was just sitting there shaking with rage, and then I popped off on Twitter, as I do sometimes.
Can I actually read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is her tweet. Janelle is killing this, but the audacity of the Oscars to start with an homage to all the Black movies they snubbed and have a black woman sing about it to the white nominees, the sheer caucasity of it all. And I thought it was very, it was an interesting statement because I think most people might be watching that from a very different lens.
Yeah.
So someone might be watching the Oscars and thinking, oh good, they included them. But you're thinking, not at the level they needed to be included. They're singing and dancing.
No, I think it gives them a pass. I think they did that because they thought, yeah, some people are going to be like, oh, look, the Oscars aren't so white. They included them. But no, you do not get to use black performers to make yourself feel better, pat yourself on the back, and then next year also not nominate them. And we've seen, like, there's, again, structural racism within the Academy. And those people are the ones casting, greenlighting projects. And it is just like a big issue in the industry that I think they get to sweep under the rug when they do things like this.
Now, speaking of systemic discrimination and racism, you had talked about for Refinery 29 the fact that Canadian television is very white as well. And it's the same idea of the showrunners and the executive producers hiring people who look like them, which is what we all do, right? So if you don't have anyone at the top that looks like you, you're going to have a hard time making your way in. And I wanted to use that as sort of a segue into, Jane, some of your research that you've done with Ryerson. So you wrote a commentary, and this is how I found you. I Googled you. And in that commentary, you were talking about the lack of diversity, I believe, in the library system.
Yes.
And you came to a few conclusions. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so librarianship is an overwhelmingly white profession. We have many statistics that show it's well above 90%. It's a very white profession. And a lot of the initiatives, and we talk a lot about diversity, but nevertheless, the profession hasn't really moved the dial forward because a lot of it is very skin deep in nature, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So it's very tokenistic, and often we hire people of color and we pat ourselves on the back that, hey, we've done a great job, we've hired these people of color, but unfortunately, the systemic racism that still exists within our structures makes their life very difficult, and it makes them have to sort of shoulder the burden of being the so-called diversity hire, right? Like, so that is a bit of a burden that people of color have to carry. So, and there was a little bit of reluctance, I think, within my circles, generally speaking, as a white person and as a white librarian, to accept that whiteness is still really the dominant force, and white fragility is really what's behind that, the concept of white fragility.
Can you explain that concept for us?
So white fragility is, you know, Robin DiAngelo is, we have the book. Robin DiAngelo has a nice, tidy definition, but what I'll suggest it is that we tend to forget that whiteness is the dominant force in our culture, hence we have Black History Month. And the reason we have Black History Month is because every other month of the year is essentially White History Month.
Right.
So we need to really think about that. We need to understand that whiteness is sort of the dominant culture, and it is the default, right? So, and then when we suggest, when it is suggested that that's a bad thing and that racism does still exist, white people tend to get kind of defensive, right? You know, like, no, well, I'm not racist. Or Canadians, generally speaking, like to believe that they are not racist. That's something that happens somewhere else.
Yeah.
And when you kind of mix up intention with the harm done, like, so, oh, well, no, I didn't mean to say that. When I told you you had nice hair, I wasn't trying to tokenize you, but what we're not recognizing is the actual harm that's done.
Right.
When we do commit these microaggressions, say things that are maybe inappropriate, and that's not even to get started on the overt ways that racism still exists, like the example that you said, Shem, right? So there's a lot of denial that's wrapped up in being white because it is the dominant culture.
It's also, if you are a black person and you're fighting that fight every day, also forgive yourself if you can't fight every fight.
Yeah, I think it's
I
important.
let a lot go because I don't have the energy. I need to have the energy to be a wife and a mother and all of these other things. You can't fight all the time.
It's important to have white allies, though, right? Like
100%.
Jane, who will step up and speak about these things. Because, you know, we were talking kind of off camera, but like, you get tired of talking about it sometimes.
Exhausted.
Our voices
Imagine
aren't
how
heard.
tired we are.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's not always heard.
And I want to thank Shem, Kathleen, and Jane for being a part of this and just being so open and candid about it. We'll continue the conversation. I don't think this should just stay during Black History Month. It's a conversation that needs to happen. Absolutely. White Fragility, the book, is incredible.